Hey guys, Ronan here. The 3.6 complete banners have just dropped. So today we're going to have a little chat through some of the strengths, weaknesses, and pull value for each of the characters. Let's get into it. We knew Nahida, Nilu were going to be the 5 stars. That was revealed to us in the live stream. We kind of had a good idea that Layla was going to be there, because her hangout event is coming, but I am very, very surprised with the other two 4 stars. So we've got Dori and we have Kuki Shinobu. Let's start with Dori. Let's get it out of the way right now. Dori is not a good character. She's an electro healer, battery. She's just really, really niche, and thanks to the release of Yao Yao, even those niches have kind of gone. I had some teams, one in particular, that I made her work in really, really early on. Aggravate Kaching and Aggravate Yaimiko team, but even though she wasn't the best option, I just found her a little better than Kuki in those teams, especially in the Yaimiko team, mostly because of the energy refunding that Dori has. She was never the best option there. It was just, I need a healer in this team for this specific situation, and made Dori work. She's very burst reliant. Everything in her kit, her healing, her energy refunding, all comes from her burst. And she doesn't generate a lot of energy. Without her passive and using her E on cooldown, even that only reduces her energy costs slightly. I've found you still need to run something like Vav Greatsword, or I actually ended up using Sacrificial Greatsword on her. Pretty much the only character that can make use of that weapon. And even then, you struggle to get her burst up. And if you can't get her burst up, then why is she even there? And because of the way her burst works, you're playing circle impact. You have to be within range of the genie when it's down. Her electro application is tied to the tether for that burst, and it doesn't have a particularly long range. It doesn't really have any AoE. So if you're playing her in a Hyper Bloom team, you need to run to the Dendro cores to trigger them. It's just a really, really clunky playstyle. That's, some people will love it. Most people hate it. And because of that, in any situation, you can run Dori. Kuki is just better. Let's move on to Layla. Layla is a cryo shielder, and her whole kit relies on that shield never breaking. Yes, it is the second best shield in the game, second only to Zhongli. The fact that it can break, it makes her value plummet, because while it's up, she's great. Damage is okay. It's not amazing by any means. The damage from her burst, scaling with HP, almost 8% of her max HP. It's nothing to be sniffed at. If you build her full HP spec on something like Tenacity of the Millilith, you can easily push over 40k HP. That's 3k per tick of her burst. It's not a huge amount of damage, but it's not bad either. It fires off every, I think, 1.5 seconds, so you can get 8 or 9 ticks of that from her burst. The cryo application is kind of underrated as well, because it's tied to her shield being up, and that's the key thing through everything with Layla, is her shield needs to be up. So even though you have that shield there and you have that resistance to interruption, you do still need to dodge. It's more of a safety net than Zhongli's shield, where you can just stand there and face tank everything. Because of her stacking mechanic with her shield, every couple of seconds it'll fire off 4 shooting stars that deal cryo damage and apply cryo to the enemy. So every couple of seconds you're getting that cryo application. Throw in her burst into the mix as well, and because both of them can have 100% uptime, you've almost always got this field of cryo damage there. I just think personally it's really underrated, and because of how good her shield is in content where you are going to take lots of little hits of damage, her shield can hold through that. So it situationally removes the need for you to run a healer, allowing you, especially in a freeze team or a mono cryo team, it allows you to not run someone like Kokomi or Diona and go for Layla, who's going to be that little bit more offensive, adding that little bit more damage, which can be the difference between clearing a chamber with 3 stars or clearing the chamber with 2 stars. You know, not an amazing character, but Layla's definitely a good, solid 4-star unit. The last of the 4 stars, Cookie is an Electro off-field DPS / healer. Before Dendro, she was okay. Kinda in a similar situation to Layla, where I thought she was very underrated. She had good healing. Because of the way her scaling works, you could run her in certain taser teams where you could build her with some EM rather than just going full HP and get some decent damage out of her as well. The only part of her kit that you really need is her elemental skill. Her elemental skill, every 1.5 seconds, pulses out from your active character, deals electro damage to everything nearby. And it says nearby, but it's actually a fairly decent sized AoE. And then on top of that, it heals your active character as well. And that healing is actually surprisingly good, especially when you've got this passive to give it a little boost. She's one of the few split scaling characters where that dual scaling actually works. So look here, we've got a full EM build Kuki Shinobu. Yes, they're kind of unrealistic, perfect artifacts, but it's a good demo of how her kit actually works. So the healing with a full EM build with max HP substats, it's over 4k every 1.5 seconds. Put that in context, we've got a mega HP Kokomi here, and her jellyfish at 53k HP heals your active character for 5.5k, which when you think this cookie build is actually fully offensive, that healing's pretty good. The main thing that makes Cookie so good is the kind of slower ticking of her elemental skill. Because it ticks every 1.5 seconds, it gives you time to get multiple dendro cores on the ground before it procs and then triggers them all. If you have too fast electro, it can overtake the core production and you end up not being able to hyperbloom anymore. If you have too slow, you're wasting dendro cores on the ground. So she's almost a perfect 4-star for hyperbloom teams. That is actually also her problem. She is very hyperbloom reliant. I hear people say she's very dendro reliant. She's not dendro reliant. She's even more niche than that. She works okay in aggravate teams. She works okay in spread teams, but you'd rather use someone else. If you're running aggravate Kaching, for example, your second electro unit is going to be Fischl. So your healer in that situation is going to be Yao Yao. So Cookie, amazing unit, almost perfect in her niche, but outside of that niche, she works, but there's better options. Now on to the 5 stars, and let's start with Nilou. Nilou is one of the most polarizing characters in Genshin. Her design is absolutely fantastic. Her kit on paper is brilliant, but there's some big drawbacks. Nilou is a Hydro Super Bloom enabler. That's pretty much the only way you can describe her, because that is really all she does. Is she applies Hydro, she makes Bloom cores have bigger booms. You can use her in vape and other really, really niche roles, but if you're doing that, you might as well delete half of her kit. It's fun. Go do it. Have your fun. But you're at that point, you're not using Nilou to do Nilou things. You're just using Nilou to enjoy Nilou more. The key thing with Nilou is her elemental skill. Her elemental skill, you hit it once, you normal attack a couple of times, you hit it a third time, and it gives you this huge Hydro ring, which stays on your active character, so you can swap off Nilou to your other units. It gives you a buff based on your party composition. And this is where her drawbacks come in. Or should I say, this is where her perceived drawbacks come in. If your team has no element other than Dendro or Hydro, every time you create a Bloom core, it's considered a bountiful core, which have bigger AoE, can't trigger Hyper Bloom or Burgeon, which you're not going to be triggering yourself anyway because you've only got Dendro or Hydro in your team, but the enemies can't make them explode by accident. And thanks to her second passive, those bountiful cores can deal up to 400% more damage. Her entire kit is reliant on you only using Dendro and Hydro, but it works. It's very, very niche, but it works. Nilou Super Bloom teams at the moment are probably one of the biggest AoE damage teams in the game. Nilou herself actually doesn't need a massive amount of investment. You literally just need HP. Nothing else. For her Bloom teams, her burst isn't really necessary. It can do a fair bit of damage, but it's two big Hydro waves. It looks cool, but it's not necessary to make her work. So ER isn't the be-all and end-all for her. Her personal damage isn't amazing. She does have really, really good AoE Hydro application. Her other limitation is that her teams are very AoE focused. They can struggle a little bit in single target because in AoE you can produce Bloom core after Bloom core after Bloom core and just be constantly proccing them. A bit like Hyper Bloom and Burgeon have their own internal cooldown where an enemy can only produce 2 damaging cores at a time. So you can produce 5 Bloom cores from one enemy. Only 2 of them will actually deal damage. But if you make that one enemy into 2, 3, 4, that 2 suddenly becomes 8. And if they're all grouped together, all 4 of those enemies are taking damage from 8 cores all at the same time. So she does work incredibly well in AoE, but in single target, because of that 2 core limit, she can struggle a little bit. It's not to say Nilou teams can't 36 star the Abyss, can't delete bosses in the overworld. They can, but other teams are going to be far, far better at it. The other slight knock on Nilou is her teams get exponentially better with Nahida. She is very free-to-play friendly. Her teams function well using 4-star units with not an insane amount of investment. The team we've got on the screen here: run 2 Dendro, run Yao Yao. Collei is technically better than Dendro Traveler, but I prefer Dendro Traveler. You can even put Black Tassel on Yao Yao to boost her healing. In this case, you're not looking at Barbara as a healer. Barbara is your on-field hydro driver with a full EM setup. Full click, full damage Barbara. And it actually works. And it works surprisingly well. But it's a little clunky. It doesn't feel incredibly comfortable to play. Now, you swap out that Dendro Traveler for a Nahida, and suddenly it clicks. Suddenly you realize the power of a Nilou team. But that's not to say you need Nahida to make Nilou work. Nilou functions perfectly well without her. So, if you don't, for whatever reason, like Nahida, I'm not the biggest fan of Nahida as a character. I don't particularly like her animations. I don't particularly like her on-field playstyle. So if you refuse for whatever reason to pull for Nahida, you can pull for Nilou, and you can destroy things with Nilou teams without the Dendro Archon. And with that, we move on to Nahida. Quite literally the Dendro god. Possibly the most meta-defining character I've seen in my time in Genshin. She has insane Dendro application. Her elemental skill, even from off-field, will tick every 2.5 seconds at a base. If you put her burst up and have an electro character in the team, that drops down to every 2 seconds. And it applies 1.5 units of Dendro to 8 opponents. Only one of those opponents needs to have a Dendro-related reaction trigger on them. And it'll apply Dendro to all of them. So if you've got, say, a Kokomi jellyfish down, all your enemies are nicely grouped up inside that jellyfish AoE, you're going to be constantly proccing Bloom. It's going to trigger a Bloom reaction on one. The others have Hydro already applied to them because of the jellyfish. It then triggers Dendro damage on the other 7, and boom, you've got your max Bloom Seeds, which then your Electro unit triggers, and you've got your instant 2 hits of Hyper Bloom damage. That lasts 25 seconds. So you can literally just start the fight, swipe to put Nahida's mark on every single one of the enemies, activate her burst, swap off, and forget about her. It's incredible. But that is also what makes her kind of clunky to play in multi-wave content. So if you've got a wave of 4 enemies, you apply Nahida's E to all 4 of those die. You've then got to swap back into Nahida, reapply her skill, and restart your rotation, which for some characters isn't good. That means that she is very difficult to play in some team compositions because, like Sino, for example, you don't want to end his burst early. If it was an AoE on the ground, you wouldn't need to reapply it, but then that would make her even more broken than she already is. She also has some pretty insane buffs tied to her burst as well, where she can give the active character 25% of her elemental mastery. So if you build a full EM Nahida, which has got 1,000 elemental mastery, her burst will pass 250 EM onto whoever your active character is. Because of her insane duration and good trigger intervals, Nahida isn't just tied solely to traditional Dendro teams. One of the teams you might have seen flying around YouTube is a burn melt team where you use Nahida to keep permanent burning uptime on the enemies so that Ganyu can melt every single charge shot. It's amazing to see. And because of Nahida's elemental mastery share, she's even buffing Ganyu's damage a little bit more. It's just ridiculous. There's not a lot that can be said about Nahida that hasn't already been said a million times before. I don't like putting the whole must pull tag on a character. No character really is must pull, because you're not going to fail to clear the abyss because you don't have Nahida. You're not going to not be able to kill certain bosses in the overworld because you don't have Nahida. What Nahida does is make those things easier. Dendro teams are the meta right now because they have a really high floor with a slightly lower than other teams' ceiling. With very little investment, you can get quite a lot of damage out of a Hyper Bloom team, for example. When you get to a certain point of investment, other teams start outperforming them. What Nahida does then is she not only raises the floor of those Dendro teams even further, she raises the ceiling as well. She's not a character I particularly like, but she is an incredible unit. She's not a must pull, but would probably be my highest recommended pull after Kazuha. And I think that about does it for today's banner review. My first ever one, so if you think I could do something a little bit better, then let me know in the comments. I didn't want to go into too much detail. Other content creators do that a lot better than me, but I did want to give a bit of an overview about why certain mechanics with a character are so good, rather than just saying Kuki Shinobu is great in Hyper Bloom because of her skill. You need to elaborate on why her skill works so well in Hyper Bloom. I'll do another one of these for the Baiju Ganyu banner, so stay tuned for that. Like, sub, all that good stuff. And until the next one, bye.